Urban Meyer suspended 3 games as boss. Athletic director Gene Smith will be suspended for about a half a month starting on the final day of this month, going through mid-September. Bottom line, our Trevor Matich, college football analyst, is here, national champion. 60,000 pages of documents, thousands of text messages, one press conference. It's done. There's a resolution. Your thoughts?
My thoughts are I still am not satisfied with knowing enough. There were a couple of things that Urban Meyer said that I think made me feel a little better about the situation, and a couple that made me feel still unsatisfied. One is that at the very end, when he said that he wasn't aware of the text messages sent to his wife Shelley by Courtney Smith, Zach Smith's former wife. Those apparently allegedly show photographs of her being bruised or having bruises. And I wanted the next question to be asked, which was, well, if you weren't aware of them at the time, when did you become aware of them?
Right.
And then what did you do? We didn't get an answer to that, and so I'm not satisfied with that. Another thing that I would like to know a little bit more about is that it was said that Gene Smith, the athletic director, and Urban Meyer did not properly report these allegations up to compliance.
Right.
But Gene Smith took responsibility for that. He said that it was his job to report it upstairs. So I would like to know from the body of the report to what degree they held Urban Meyer also responsible for not reporting it, even though Gene Smith said it was his job to do.
Sure.
So there are still some things that I would like to know. But right now it sounds like one thing is clear, and that is that the commission went through a tremendous amount of information, and I respect the work that they have done.
For the purposes of clarity, Trevor does have some questions. We should mention that Mary Jo White, who led the investigation, former head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, in her last comments before we heard from Drake, Meyer, and Smith, did say a full public report is coming soon. And we should mention that he did say, Urban Meyer, when asked twice whether he should have been suspended, said, quote, "I trust and support our president." That's usually a yes or no answer. He instead opted to go with, "I trust and support our president." Let's get a little different perspective from our Rece Davis. He is the host of ESPN's College Game Day. He saw that press conference in its entirety, like you all did here tonight on ESPN2. Rece, your thoughts on the news that Urban Meyer has been suspended for the first 3 games of the 2018 season?
I think it's a bit of a half measure, Zubin, to be honest. He either did something to rise to the level of his removal or he didn't. And I'm skeptical about the suspension because of this. The goal in a situation like this is to improve the circumstances, improve the protocol, and hopefully help those who have suffered from situations like this long term as best you can. And to me, a suspension sort of smacks of trying to give those who wanted punitive measures against people just enough of what they wanted, if that makes any sense. Now, I understand that Urban Meyer and Gene Smith deserve some punishment. My suggestion previously had been that perhaps some type of voluntary donation of a significant portion of their salary to causes that could help those who've been affected by domestic violence or whatever might have been a more appropriate measure. It just seems like the suspension doesn't do much. The 3 games was clearly to keep him out of the TCU game, which I totally, if you're going to do it, I understand that because it would have invited a great deal more skepticism had you allowed him to come back for a big game like that. So I agree with Trevor wholeheartedly in that I respect the work that the commission did. It certainly seems at first glance and our first hearing to have been thorough. But I don't know that the suspension accomplishes what it might have set out to do or what they said they were attempting to do.
Very interesting. Rece mentioned the TCU game. That is the 3rd of 3 games. The first game is against Oregon State, who they should handily defeat. Then up next is Rutgers, coached by former Ohio State assistant Chris Ash, and then nationally ranked TCU for the 3rd of those 3 games in the middle of September. You travel the country every Saturday, speak to coaches, administrators, fans, and have been doing this for over 20 years. What do you think the general reaction in college football, let's say outside of Columbus, the general reaction in college football to this decision for a program of this marquee would be after hearing all this?
The short answer is I don't know exactly. I think it probably has every athletic department in the country examining their procedures and protocols and seeing if they have anything in their own departments that would bring up similar type problems. That would be the first thing I would think. But beyond that, in terms of people agreeing or disagreeing with the suspension or the way all of this was handled, I would imagine that most other places in the country are far more concerned about whether they have issues that they could be concerned or should be concerned about.
One more for you, Rece, here, just from a football perspective. Urban Meyer is 73-8. Let that sink in for a second at home. 73-8 at Ohio State with one national championship. The program for now is in the hands of Ryan Day, who is in his 30s and has never been a head coach at any level of football. From passing the baton, at least temporarily, from Meyer to Day, what kind of situation do you think he's in right now? Speaking of Day.
He's in a difficult one if he has to make a head coach type decision on the field. Now, he certainly has support and guys who've been head coaches with Greg Schiano and Kevin Wilson, both on that staff, both of whom have been head coaches, Schiano at Rutgers and in the NFL and Wilson at Indiana. So he has guys that he can rely on in terms of the planning. But in the heat of the moment, you've got a new guy. And, so speaking strictly of football here, difficult decisions that have to be made within the context of the game that might fall at his feet. It's different not having Urban Meyer there. I don't think there's any question about that, and potentially that could have an impact. And then when they go back to hearing Urban's voice as the leader again, that too will be an adjustment period. So I think it's a pretty difficult situation on the field. And I understand relatively that's not as important as the other issues we're talking about. But on the field, I think Ohio State will have some significant adjustments to make in terms of whose voice they're hearing as the leader and when the voice changes and all of that kind of thing.